All right, guys, it is noon, which means it's time to bring up our friends over at Boise State University, at the Institute of Pervasive Cybersecurity. Joining me on stage is Edward Vasko. He oversees Cyberdome and helps students get trained on open XDR and all things cybersecurity. And then we have Carol Barks, who is also a professor at Boise State. Tell us a little bit about what you do, Carol.
My area of expertise is neuroscience-based conflict resolution and communication. So I'm all about how the brain works and how you leverage it in ways that you can better understand where you're coming from and better understand where other people are coming from so we can minimize the effects of conflict and stress.
Okay, so you guys may be wondering, so why is she up on stage when we're talking about open XDR and cybersecurity? And it's a really important topic. In cybersecurity, we all know it's not if we will be attacked by the bad actors, but when. So breaches are happening every day, multiple times a day. We all know ransomware is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So we've got security practitioners out there. We have CISOs at all large enterprises, at MSSPs, and they have a very, very stressful job because they know if they go to bed that night, what if, right? Or when will I be the next target? And so, Ed, I think you had the foresight to see, with your experience and training students, that there's more education beyond just teaching students about cybersecurity, but also their well-being, right? So when we talk about cyber attacks, what happens to our security practitioners and our CISOs, the responsibility, the burden that they carry?
Yeah, no, without a doubt, Susana. And I think the goal of the Institute has always been to produce a worker that's ready for work. So taking our students, giving them the knowledge, giving them the skills, helping them build their competency. And competency doesn't just go down the technical track. It's an important aspect, and that's where OpenXDR and our partnerships really come into play. And it's where the Cyberdome really gets built. But there are these essential skills that our students need to learn and need to activate upon so that they can go into industry being the most effective that they can be and being ready to work. And those essential skills really come down to communication, they come down to handling stress, they come down to realizing that there are going to be situations where all of what they know and all of what they've learned will be challenged. Mm-hmm. And so engaging with faculty members like Carol and others to really help engage the industry and make industry aware of how to deal with these stressful situations is paramount. And so that's where Carol and I connected on up. And last year we had a chance to do a virtual panel at RSA. This year we just left a conversation, in-person conversation. We had about 160 professionals. And we're really trying to activate on different ways to engage the industry as a whole, to know how to deal with stress, how to deal with C-suite executives that are stressed when a breach occurs. And so engaging with Carol, bringing her expertise to bear really helps not just the technical community, helps our students. Mm-hmm. And it helps the industry as a whole.
Yeah, take us through your study, Carol. So you and Ed met up, and tell us a little bit about the research and what you discovered.
Well, there's a whole lot of research. It's not just my research, but information that we know in the field. And there's a really great thing about the concept of neuroscience is if I understand what's going on in my brain, then I can be more forgiving of what it is that I'm going through, or I can understand it more effectively. Likewise, if somebody's coming at me hot because they're stressed because of a cybersecurity attack or a threat, I can better understand where they're coming from too. And so some of the adjectives that we usually give people when things are difficult are usually not positive, right? But if we can go, oh, this is what's going on in their brain, then all of a sudden we cut everybody some more slack, and all of a sudden we can learn to manage things from a way that is more peaceful and more effective. So I think in your field of cybersecurity, this is very similar to the medical field or any fields that are really advancing rapidly, is human capital is really important in all of them, but the peak performance for what do? We get the smartest people, we get the people who have the most experience, but then if we're all equal that way, what do I have left to leverage? And you can leverage your noggin.
So what are they experiencing? Take me through a security analyst has just been, notices they've been breached, or their customers that they're monitoring has been breached. What are they experiencing, and what are the coping mechanisms that you would recommend?
Yeah, perfect. This is a fun topic. So what happens when we have a threat, then our brain really changes how it operates. So our brains have two little guys in the middle part of our brain called amygdala. They're about the size of almonds, and they're responsible for our freeze, fight, or flight responses. And when they take over, which they do 80 times a day on average for even little threats, the whole idea is to keep us safe. And when our brains are thinking about keeping us safe, they're not thinking about a cybersecurity attack. They're thinking about warring tribes. They're thinking about saber-tooth tigers that happened back in the day, but we still respond as if it's life or death. And so the interesting part of our brain is our thinking part of our brain is in the front. It only thinks about 2% of what our brain does. The rest is all happening under the hood. And so when we have a threat, those amygdala, those little guys, take over our brain and shut down that thinking part of your brain. So if you've ever had arguments or conversations where you leave going, God, why didn't I say blah, blah, blah? That's because your brain is offline for business. And so with that in mind, all those things that you've prepped for, unless you've prepped really well, are not going to happen. And so getting people on the team from all different angles to feel that it's safer and that I can get myself back into my body so I can start thinking, the faster I can do that, the faster I can actually mitigate the resolutions that keep us safe or get us back to being safe.
Yeah, Ed, I want to bring you in. I mean, that's why it's also so important for security practitioners to have an incident response plan, right? So it's something they can resort back to.
Yeah, and to a large extent, it's understanding and being aware of the process, following that process, but also being aware of what's happening inside your brain. I think that extra piece of information for analysts and for leaders within a cybersecurity program, it's critical to being able to recognize when the stress is occurring, why it's occurring, knowing that there's a process to follow. I mean, a great example, we talked about pivoting the concept of a cyber attack into responding to a fire.
Sure.
And without a plan, if we just simply show up to fight a fire and nobody brings water, nobody brings hoses, nobody brings anything else, there's not much we're going to be able to do except react and see the fire burn whatever the thing is down. In this particular case, having a plan, executing the plan, and really getting into the mode of creating that memory to be able to activate that plan when something happens, and then knowing about the fact that you have these issues, these elements within your brain that create stress, and how to move back from that stress is hypercritical. So being able for our MSSP partners or for our direct customers, and our direct organizations that have security operations centers, to be able to deal with not just the stress of the moment, but then the resulting stress that comes from the concentric circle, so to speak, of operations center to leadership, to executive leadership, to C-suite, to external customers, to the press, and so forth and so on. So being able to understand and deal with all of those constituencies and being able to have a process that you can follow is hypercritical.
Yeah. And Carol, anything surprise you as you learned a little bit more about cybersecurity with your knowledge and expertise? I mean, I can only imagine for a SOC analyst or CISO, as they're going through all of the emotions and the worry, anxiety, they're also, they're trying to fight the situation, the breach, but then also they're worrying about their own job and their own survival. Like, will they make it?
Yeah, correct. And so whenever you're dealing with these types of situations, you have multiple levels of stakeholders, right? You have the person who is worried about their own job, you have the organization, you have the stakeholders, the investors, and they all are impacting the situation. But there's something I wanted to circle back around and share with you is that if any of you have ever been mad longer than, say, 90 seconds, which I have, right? I can be mad for days depending on what I'm mad about, right? But here's the thing. So because so much happens under the hood, what happens first is we get an emotion in our brain that we are not conscious of, and then that releases some chemicals, and typically in these cases they're stress chemicals, and then those pop out as feelings to which we react. And if you keep reacting, it's because you keep rethinking the same thoughts. So one of the really great things that can happen in these kind of moments is to change what you're thinking and tell yourself a different story, because then you're more likely to more quickly be entering into that thinking part of your brain. And then likewise, the more you can connect the dots for people so that they understand what steps we're going to take to get us past this, what are the pros and cons of what could happen and what couldn't happen. People don't so much care if it's bad news. I mean, we don't want bad news, but at least if I know you're being direct and that you've got me, then I know what I can forecast from there. And I know what to tell all of our stakeholders. And those are some of the little things that we forget to do. And so Ed and I were talking about the fire department because I used to be a firefighter in a previous career. And one of the things that we'd oftentimes would say is slow is fast. And that is definitely the same thing in stress, because if we just operate off of our stress responses, we become reaction machines and we are reacting not with our full set of information. So being slow enough to start noticing what's going on and be able to process what you're seeing in yourself and others is the key to get through it without making mistakes on top of other mistakes.
Yeah, that's crucial. But what if you have a boss or you have an executive team that is harping on you? Get it fixed, What do you do? I mean, yes, you're saying slow is fast, but when you've got your boss or your CISO who's all over you at that point, what do you do?
We actually just went through these various stages of a breach and at the C-suite level where you have this idea of panic, and then you have this scorched earth mentality, fix it at all costs, and then the third stage is fix everything, because at that point, in a traditional sense, most teams aren't able to give the C-suite enough information to actually be able to pinpoint the why and what and so forth, because the stress levels are so high. And this is exactly where what Carol talks about, what her expertise comes into play, because it's critical for a team and for a leadership team of a security program to be able to take these steps that she's going to talk about to follow through and be able to kind of quell the situation so that those three-pronged attacks by the C-suite don't occur.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things you can do. One is I'd rather walk around if we're having a meeting. I don't want you to sit down, because the walking around moves, our brains work best when they're getting a lot of oxygen. So if I can walk with you as we're talking, let's go take a lap around our building, let's go take a lap inside. That is really helpful for people to get oxygen, get back online. And then also learning to ask what we call the next best question, where rather than getting defensive, because it's so easy when you're being attacked to be defensive of, I didn't do this, or I'm doing the best I can, or chill out, dude, or whatever you want that response to be. And instead, I really want to unpack that person. And there's a really great rule in neuroscience, which is he or she who has control of their emotions the most wins. And so
So true.
It is. And so if you're as mad as hell and I'm also really stressed, then you're very likely going to be able to launch me. But if I'm channeling Mother Teresa or Gandhi or whoever my peacekeeper is, and I just slow down a little bit and I let you unpack, you're going to sync with me. It's something that are called mirror neurons, and they're the things that make us cry in movies, or the things that make us sad when somebody else is sad, or laugh when they laugh. And so we can leverage that in these moments to really, with our tone, slow down and go, I gotcha, and having some nonverbal communication experience is really helpful. So many of those kind of things are important. But the next best question that I breezed past is, what I want you to think about is, instead of being defensive, I want you to say, I know this is really concerning you, but tell me a little bit about what your biggest concerns are. And what does it look like if we address those concerns? And what timeline are you looking for this to happen in? And what would resolution look like? And so you then let them unpack what's in their brains, and then you say, okay, these are the 3 things. You're worried about this, this, this. This is a timeline. This is what we got. Is there anything else I'm missing? And then when they say no, you go, okay, is it okay now if I give you some of my thoughts about our next approaches? Because you've already unpacked them. And so then they're better able to hear you, and they've hopefully started syncing with you because you're slowing everything down. And then that's where the magic can happen.
Those are all very applicable, not just for a cyber attack, but even in our relationships, whatever role you have at your company, just to have those best practices and keep those in mind. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
What about for those in the audience who are C-suite? What kind of approach should they take in these type of manners?
Well, I think the first thing is that knowing that their team is already under stress trying to operate. And so the interesting thing about distractions is it takes about 20 minutes on average to get back on track whenever you're distracted. So what I don't need is a C-suite person coming in and saying, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? I need you to be able to let me get the work done that you want. But I also need you to try to refrain from coming in hot. So the story that you need to tell yourself is that you and your team are on the same side of the equation, and that we collectively are going to solve this. Not that you are the problem or your team's the problem, but we have this breach. That's the problem. What are we collectively going to do? So that it positions us in a way that we are collective rather than working against each other or defending against each other in there. And the tone I would love for you to use, even when you're stressed, is a tone that is like talking to you, sharing our best beverage. We talk in a way that's less aggressive. And so then that doesn't trigger my brain as much, because if you're coming at me hot, then my fight or flight is going to even be more exasperated, and I'm not going to be as effective for you.
Awesome. Ed, mental health is so important as we educate and raise our children, the next generation. As you oversee the Cyber Institute over at Boise State, how important is this research, these recommendations? How do you incorporate that in your curriculum? And as these students go out and they become the next CISOs and the next security practitioners?
Yeah. I think like I said before, the key element here is not just enabling our students with the type of technical skills that'll make them ready to work, but those other essential skills. Maybe we call them soft skills before, but to me they're really hyper essential to be successful, because it's not just a matter of coming in and recognizing that you're a bit flipper or that you're a cybersecurity analyst that's going to sit in front of a system and be able to respond to events. It's that you do have a career path, that this career actually requires you to be well-rounded and being able to have those kinds of conversations, knowing enough about who you are, how you respond to stress, how other people respond to stress, and being able to recognize those physiological and behavioral those kinds of situations, and being able to respond to them in an effective way. Even knowing that that is an approach to take is something that's critical for students, critical for learners as they become workers. They are not going to be perfect at it. It's just like every other skill. It's just like every other level of competency. But understanding it and being aware of it before they graduate, before they go out into the world and start their careers or expand their careers is really, really critical. So we're engaging with students, our students, as they're working real-world problems and they're gaining this knowledge and they're working with our customers. We're making certain that they're actually having the hard conversations with our clients and being able to tell them not just the technical details, but the actual reasons and actually giving a perspective of this is how we're going to solve it. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to achieve this. And that working together, we're going to be better than working apart.
Any last comments, Carol?
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking about is oftentimes I hear that these types of things are soft skills, which is kind of the normal idea. But with the advent of neuroscience, we had the ability to look at people's brain scans and figure out what they do. So it's a very hard science now because it's very definable. And so back to that frontier of peak performance, the more you understand how little things affect people in a big way really gives you the advantage for everyone that you serve. So just a quick little takeaway, the word that triggers our brain the most, individual people might have slightly different words, but as a whole is the word no. So if you know that people are stressed and you have to give them bad news and are you going to have this fixed in a minute, you don't want to say, no. That's where you want to talk around it because you're triggering them even more.
Right.
So learning those types of things gives you really a superpower that puts you ahead of the curve. So neuro nerd out is what I'd say.
Well, I feel like I could be here all day listening and learning from you, Carol, and thank you so much, Ed, as well. They'll be sticking around for a little bit, so if you have any further questions that I didn't ask, make sure you stop by and say hello to them. And remember, we'll be here all day. We're raffling, I think, $400 at 5:40 this evening. Oh, $1,500. Oh, my goodness. So make sure you stick around.
That's great.
We've got several other speakers that will be joining us up on stage. So enjoy. I think lunch has been served, so go upstairs and have something to eat, and we'll see you guys back here at 1 o'clock.
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne.
All right.
Thanks,
Ed.
Susanna.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.